record on this computer, and then I'm going to get Facebook Live going.
I'm super nervous.
Oh, it'll be fine. I always end up screwing up a little bit and saying the wrong thing, so don't worry, you'll be fine.
Me too. I always have the thought, like, why did I say that? Or afterwards, like, I should not have asked that. That was personal.
Well,
I had that every
just
time.
there's nothing you can't ask me.
Okay, good.
I'm pretty.
I'll be haunted by something else I say then.
How fat are you, Mark? Fat. That's just what we need to know.
All right, join us. A talk with.
Yay or nay? I can't see.
Oh.
Right.
I think they look really cool, but if you can't see.
I mean, I can see you, but if I sit like that, I look stupid. And then...
No, you look kind of like, oh, is that the question you asked?
Well, let me think about that.
Oh, that's a good move. Oh, that one's good.
I haven't been practicing for the last 45 minutes, I swear.
I'm beautiful. No,
I can't see what you guys are doing because I'm like trying to type this thing up, but I can hear everything that's going on. It's like, it's making me laugh.
One quick question. I have one image. I don't know if it's too graphic, Kate, to show for your audience.
Oh, no, it's not.
Okay. I don't know if I'll show it, but I just wanted to not show it, and then you go, oh, geez.
Geez.
Okay.
Mark.
Then we can start going live now. And setting up the feed.
You guys are awesome at this.
Oh, yes. The other day was a cluster. We're getting better, though.
We were like, sorry, Tammy.
Yeah, there was a lot of that. Okay. and we are live. So good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome back to our Visiting Artist Talks. I'm Ty Nicholson, the Ceramic Studio Manager, joined today with, of course, Kate Driscoll, the Exhibitions Program and Gallery Manager, and featuring Mark Errol.
Hello.
Co-owner of Plow Gallery, artist and educator at Valdosta State University.
Correct. Yes.
So, Mark, why don't you fill us in a little bit about yourself?
Oh, hi. Yeah, I live in Tifton, Georgia, south of Atlanta, south of Macon, just above the Florida border in a great little town. And I teach 40 miles even south of that at Valdosta State University, where I teach ceramics, I teach 3D design, and I also teach senior level capstone classes, senior preparation, helping students get ready for their life as artists. And then in Tifton, I am the co-owner with Glenn Josie of Plow Gallery, where we represent over 80 artists from around the country, over 30 or 25 states represented in that mix. We put on anywhere between 10 to 14 exhibitions a year, artist talks, events on our porch. This last year saw us engage in 2 public arts projects, and we're in talks to continue doing that. And then, yeah, I'm also a studio potter. I make work and try to exhibit wherever I can and teach privately as well. So I keep myself busy with, in the arts as much as possible.
Go ahead, Kate. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know if you wanted to ask more background questions, but I wanted to ask, what public art projects are you involved in?
So actually, when I was in grad school with Ty at Georgia State University, our sculpture professor, Mike Saul, and a bunch of us worked on a project on the Atlanta Beltline. And in that relationship with for that project, Mike and I stayed in touch with each other, and he had posted an image that he had done of a silo-like piece that he had put on the Beltline a few years ago. We saw it, we thought, oh, that speaks to our community. We are in an agricultural area here, and being that we are trying to infuse our community with art, we thought that was a great kind of tie-in between public art, contemporary art, and yet something that they would relate to in their environment. Unfortunately for him and unfortunately for us, he had sold the piece right before we had moved to our new space here. But in true Mike Saul fashion, who is just one of the great people I know, he took the money that he had earned from that and built one just for Tifton. So a year ago, in April, we installed a new version of that piece that was made for us called Day and Night. And it sits on the side of the gallery. It's open to the public 24 hours a day. And it's really fantastic. Glenn, who's the co-owner with me, has spent a year plus now photographing it every single day. And if you go to our plowgallery.com website, there's a day and night link, and you can follow the transition of that piece. It's just been a really kind of neat way to infuse public art. I mean, we are in an old house from the 1930s in the middle of the historic district. And then there's this giant 15-foot, 4,000-pound sculpture sitting on the side of the building. And it gets lots of weird reactions, but it's always a wonderful conversation starter and gets people involved in the arts in a new and unique way. And then Kurt Anderson, who's a ceramic artist, I've known also for a really, really long time. I was actually, when I was an undergrad, he was a special student at New Paltz, up at SUNY New Paltz. We stayed in touch all these 20 years plus, and he's a hard guy to kind of nail down to get pots, but he had been doing these kind of big wooden creatures, I'll call them, the things that are on his pots. He was making out of wood and installing them all over North Carolina where he was. We have a giant fence on the other side of the building, and we've been wanting to do a mural. And last October, we were able to engage our children in our community. They came and painted polka dots, which is very reminiscent of his pots, on the fence. And then Kurt was standing there with, I think we had 20 sheets of plywood that were donated. And he created the creatures. So now on the side of the building, and you can see this online as well, we have creatures of his going all the way down the side of our building. So when you drive down one side of the street, you see those. And if you drive down the other, you see the sculpture. So
that sounds fabulous.
It was super rad. I mean, you know, we don't know what we're doing when we started this project, but anytime we can find ways to engage our community and get them to like see art in a new way, we're game for it. So
yeah.
Sorry if I'm talking too much.
No.
Yeah. Can you talk less during your artist talk?
Yeah.
Could you just?
I love Kurt Anderson's work. I had the pleasure of crossing paths with him at Watershed, and I only got to meet with him real briefly, like a couple of weeks, but his work is fantastic.
He is.
But could you talk to us a little bit about your, how you got into arts in the first place, and specifically ceramics?
Sure.
Like what was that kind of narrative like?
I think like a lot of us, I kind of fell into it. I grew up in a family of kind of creative people. My mom and my dad were both artists in their own way. Never took it seriously. You know, my dad drew, my mom painted, my grandparents were artists, but my brother's a carpenter and a master carpenter at that, and really talented. And I always just found that people were making things, and I was intrigued by that. And then my other brother worked making filling, slip casting stuff for a while. So in a tiny New York City apartment, sharing with my brother, there was like plaster molds around us all the time. As we know, sleeping in clay dust, since I was like 7. I just was enamored with the material and just seeing this transformation of it. Throughout life, it kind of kept showing up in my life in different ways, high school, things like that. But I never took it as a class or understood the material. And then when I was in undergrad at New Paltz, I had transferred to New Paltz to be an art student, but I didn't know what to do. And I was actually there as an art ed major, took the ceramics class and took a metals class at the same time. And New Paltz had a really tremendous kind of art program going, and I dabbled in a lot of things. And as I was making the decision, because you had to choose between the area of your BFA, I was kind of figuring it out. And my metals teacher, Myra Mimlich Gray, came to me and she said, "Listen, I love you, but you get hurt, burnt, stuck in something every damn day. And if I was you, I would stick with clay. It's a lot more forgiving on the body." Like, okay. So, and if any of you have ever heard or met with Myra, she's a pretty like powerful force. And about 10 years later, after I saw her again, she said, "Show me your fingers." And I showed her. She goes, "You have all 10. I'm the thank for that." And it was literally in that moment where I made a decision that ceramics was the thing for me. And meeting the community that came with that was really important to me. And I was it. I just never had found anything in my life that felt like that was my calling. I was just kind of, lost as a kid. So clay was the thing that has driven my life ever since.
I had a question, and it was about your public art project.
Please.
You were talking about. I've always wondered this when people get like the public to come in and be a part of it. Like you said, local kids came and painted polka dots.
Yep.
Do you go back in and clean it up a little bit after they're done, or? I always wondered that.
I had a really funny story about that, because if you know Kurt's work, it's loose. It has a vibrancy and a sense of like play. And when we had started conjuring up the idea, the kids was something that I'm not very thoughtful when it comes to kids in the art gallery world. And that's horrible of me. I mean, it's something that I think is super important. I actually taught elementary art for 4 years in Miami years ago, but I didn't think of ways to bring kids into our environment here. So when this came up and I contacted Kurt, he was like, "Yeah, whatever, that's great." And it was perfect because Kurt's work is loose. And if Kurt did it, it would look like Kurt, but we wanted it to feel like a community project. So we have a friend here in town who has a bunch of children. And I called her up and I said, "Hey, I don't know how to even reach out in the proper way to do this." And she said, "No problem." And the next thing I know, we had a bunch of kids on the side of the school, and the school let them sign out to do a public arts project, which was even cooler. So we had about 6, 7 kids, and our artist in resident at the time, Sarah Moore, was here. She loves kids. She actually was teaching, she spent the last 2 summers in North Carolina teaching blacksmithing to 10 to 14-year-olds. What? The whole other level of like amazing. We just had buckets of paint, and the kids, Sarah went over and drew like a rough circle with their initial in it, so that we weren't getting them like painting the same thing. So like they'd go over and say, "I want to paint that one," and she'd put like an M in it or an S or whatever the child's name, and then they just kept going. So they were engaging this kind of play, and Kurt was sitting there making them. But the funny part of the story is Kurt finishes the first one, and the kids are sitting back all proud of their, polka dots. And he puts it up, and the girl walks over and goes, "Excuse me, but you're covering my polka dot." And Kurt's like, "Oh, sorry." It was so wonderful because, like they were taking ownership of it, and I loved it. And
Yeah.
Kurt moved it over a little bit to accommodate her. It's great.
Bump it up against another artist.
Yeah. To be honest.
I've always really loved your work quite a bit, Mark, and it hits on 3 fronts at least. Form, like the silhouettes are always really interesting, engaging. The surface decoration is complicated, but without being distracting.
Nice.
And there's a lot of narrative happening in there. You can find yourself lost, and most importantly, they're functional. For the most part, there you can hold them. You can actually sip a beverage out of them without like feeling like this weighs 36 pounds. It's yeah. Could you talk to us a little bit about your work and their kind of influences on your work?
Absolutely. For me, my whole life, I wanted to be an architect or an interior designer, or some kind of involvement in that world, and it just didn't fit for me mentally. I didn't understand how to get into that world. When I found clay, I think we can all relate to that first time you're introduced to clay. It's kind of, you're given this understanding of it as a material, but you don't necessarily find your voice in it. And when I was an undergrad and I was going through that kind of figuring it out, I had a fellow student say to me, "Have you ever seen the work of Kathy King?" And Kathy King I say it blatantly, is the reason I got into ceramics as far as where I am with it now. She used the surface to tell a story, and I didn't understand that was possible. I was, in a program that was heavily influenced by Asian aesthetics, which I really appreciate and love, but it wasn't what drew me to making pots. So I've always been somebody that loved to draw. I've always loved interior design and architecture. And as time has gone on, I've found ways to kind of use my drawing, my love of architecture, interior design to influence my work. And the idea of not being able to be an architect or an interior designer has led me to just think that I'm a part of an environment in that way. So if I can't create the actual building or structure, then I get to be a part of it in my own way. And, I think we can all relate to anytime somebody chooses your work to be a part of their environment, it's such an honor, because, that's a very personal thing. And I don't make work that is, I would say, quiet. It doesn't just sit in the corner and kind of, so like when someone chooses it, they're making a real specific choice. And that's always been a huge kind of relationship for me. So that, again, brings me back to that architecture, interior design kind of marriage. And I really take that very seriously. So for me, the pots kind of live in that world of relationships. I talk about my relationships on them. I use narrative in both obvious ways, like through figurative work, like I have over my shoulder there. And then I use it through color and chairs. Chairs have been a big part of my work to talk about not just specifically the idea of a domestic environment, but also people and relationships, because the minute you put two chairs together, there's a conversation that starts to happen visually. And then for me, it's a way to talk about that relationship kind of personally and specifically without giving it away. So the work always kind of lies in that way for me, is this constant narrative environment, kind of thing. For me, it's been a big transition the last few years, especially since I left grad school. My work changed, in my eyes, drastically. I don't think it changed drastically, but the way I approached it changed drastically, where it used to be about planning and being very specific with where color and pattern worked and things had to kind of fit. And I got really bored, really bored with that, and just felt like I was being contained by everything else in my life is so specific. You run a business, you teach, everything had to be very accounted for. And I wanted my work to be back to the part of what I enjoyed about it the most, which was the play and the spontaneity. So about 3-4 years ago, I think now, I started changing how I addressed the work. And that was through creating transfers of color instead of laying down the color specifically in areas. So now I brought some to show. So just very low tech, very basic ideas. This is newsprint with underglazes on them. And I just cut using X-Acto knives and scissors, either specifically the chairs, or I just cut shapes. Sometimes I'll just sit for hours and hours and hours and days and days and days cutting shapes loosely. And those shapes then play as part of the idea of the interior space structures. So I brought some examples of that as well. So having just these stripes of color kind of playing off the idea of an interior space against kind of more structured home references allows me to think of blueprints and how furniture fits in a space. The idea of space being something specifically the last few years has become even more important to me than the interior, but is the idea of ownership of space. I'm in my early 40s, and I've never really owned my own space. We, as artists, tend to share our studios. We tend to, in offices and stuff like that, we tend to share our environments. And to call something your own sounds very selfish, but I've never really been able to think about space as my own. And so pieces like this that have all these holes in it, this is closed at the top. It's a vase form, but that bottom part where there's this indication of space, to me, that's the space that I own because I created it. Nobody else can get in there. Nobody else owns that space but me because I created it. Where when this goes into somebody else's home, they own it, it's their space, but that's like that little origin of containment for me. So the idea of space and placement of color and shapes and all that is playing off that idea of the environments that we create and live in. Really drawn out answer for something that probably could have been
beautifully said. Yeah, so since you've kind of changed your approach to making, is that something you would, some advice you would give to people that are kind of starting their creative process, and instead of being so structured, maybe saying like, hey, why don't you just kind of be present with the form and then just see kind of what happens from there?
For me, it came out of like, when we're in school, a lot of our environment is, and I don't mean this negatively, but cater to us. Like we have materials, we have kilns, we have all these things that make it a lot easier to be creative. And when you start your own spaces, you have to think differently. And materiality became something that I had to think about more. Like, how could I stretch my dollar more? How could I get more out of what I'm doing? Underglazes aren't cheap, slips aren't cheap either to make, like space-wise. And so this thing that I could make a lot of and can like keep forever, these pieces of paper, some of them I've had 3 and 4 years because I just cut a little bit off or whatever. I loved that this low tech, really easy thing could stay with me. And it, clay is very time oriented. You keep pieces wet as long as we can, but there does come a time when it's like, I've had enough of you and I'm dry and I'm moving on. But the paper and the color doesn't. So I can continue that process even when I can't be in the studio making pots. I can still be making work. And I loved how like that transition allowed for this play. As artists, when we're in that situation where we need to grow or we want to grow and we're not sure how, that discomfort is really important to harvest and to go towards instead of away from. And I think as a teacher, that's the thing that I try to really elaborate on is that, what do you do in your classroom? And they say, well, I like to do portraiture. And I'm specifically thinking of a student that I just worked with this semester who was always drawn to the portrait, always drawn to the figure. And I was like, okay, so you don't have to get away from that, but let's find a new way to address it. Maybe you're going to only use straight lines for this project. Maybe you're only going to use something that doesn't flex and doesn't have dimension and it's monochromatic. And now you have to address the figure in a new way. Mm-hmm. Those challenges that we set up for ourselves tend to lead us somewhere else that we didn't know was our end result. And that's how this happened for me. It was just kind of frustration, discomfort by having to react to the pot instead of the pot being thought of originally. This allows me to keep playing, and therefore the pots kind of feed each other, and then the color feeds that. I like being uncomfortable. I like change. I like things that are spontaneous in a way that I still control them, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And change is inevitable. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was wondering, so you, since opening the gallery, that was what, 5 or 6 years ago?
This summer it'll be 5 years as Plow, 6 years since I graduated school. So yeah.
And it's been in Tifton the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was wondering if you noticed a change with your gallery being there, if you noticed a change in the community as an effect of your gallery, or how the community has reacted to it.
That's a great question. So Glenn is from this area. And when I met him in 2011, he had told me about this thing that Tifton had for many years, over 30 years, called the Love Affair, which was their big arts festival. And due to the economic downturn in 2008, to the fact that people that had been running it were kind of burnt out on it and not getting a younger crowd to come and help them, it had seen its last days and it hadn't continued after 2008. So I automatically, knew I was moving to Tifton to be with Glenn, and that I was going to need to start something. It didn't start as Plow Gallery. It started as a studio, but the reaction to the fact that there was somebody making art in their town, people really responded positively. And we, saw a community gathering. We'd hold a little opening and we'd have 30 or 40 people, and they were engaging and they were inviting, and it was just really lovely. and it just grew organically. We, for those first many years, and still pretty much to this day, we've never spent money on advertising. We've done a little bit the last year where something was like undeniable and we should do it. But it was very minimal compared to what many people spend on advertising. So we really built it all by word of mouth. And we thought that being in a small town, let them come to us, let them find us, let it be the thing that they find as their little kind of like secret. And then that sharing that grows organically and it doesn't feel threatening. When you bring contemporary kind of ideas, and I mean, we've had artists that are, showing the figure naked, and that's not normal in our community. That was kind of shocking. Ashley Maxwell, who Ty and I went to school with, she makes incredibly beautiful, thoughtful work, but the figure was exposed and people were like, oh, so to have that moment where they could come in and discover it, instead of it being like this banner in town that's like naked lady, allowed it to grow organically, and those that want to be here are here. So I think I wouldn't say that I had anything to do with like growing the arts. I would say we are continuing something that was here, but I think we've taken it in a totally different direction. We don't play safe. We very rarely have kind of catered to what they expect, and I think that's been really our strong point for us. We really try to challenge them and think about art in new ways.
That's so cool. I spent some time in Tifton, but it was I think maybe 7 years before you guys opened, and it was right after 2008, like 2008, 2010, and at the time I was, I think I just finished. I was like in high school. I remember my friends and I spent a lot of time in Tifton, and your gallery would have been something we would have loved. So that's great that's there.
We just feel fortunate every day that we're here. I think the biggest misconception is that we're fancy. I think the word gallery kind of makes people think, oh, and wear t-shirt and flip-flops and, like we serve M&Ms at our openings, like, and we do a lot of trying to get it out on the porch. We have this amazing wraparound porch on our gallery that's wide and it covers two sides of the street on the main drag here. And anytime we can get an event and multiple artists out there, I mean, that's our kind of advertising. And we've had so many times where cars are driving by near and turn around and they come back to watch a potter on the porch or, painting. We've had artists from Key West come up and do watercolors and they just sit and paint all day and people just can sit and enjoy it and not feel threatened by it, and they get exposure. It's really important.
Absolutely. I mean, these type of community engagements and art centers and galleries, they don't just belong, as you guys know, in metropolitan areas. Like they do belong in places like Tifton, and those areas are deserving of these types of places. So it's really lovely that that's happening and that it's there's growth from that as well. So it's not like you open the business and or the center and it's just like bare bones all the time. Like, no, people are coming, and your project, I'll call it, is growing. So it's, that's encouraging for sure.
I mean, there's days when, and I'll be honest, by no means, Glenn and I will sit here for days and nobody comes in and nothing happens. And we're like, oh, well, we did the best we could, And then I'm going to tell a story that is my favorite. We were probably at one of our lowest points and we got somebody came to the door and they said, hi, we're with the Easter Seals. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Easter Seals, but they are an organization that caters to those that are challenged, adults specifically, and to engage their collective, they find different things around town to do with them. And they're all levels of challenges. I mean, some of them are nonverbal, but she came in and she said, I have a van of folks from the Easter Seals. We were wondering if we were allowed in, and we're like, please come in, doors open. And they came in and they were smiling and they were engaging, and like it just, Glenn and I stood there as they walked out sobbing, because it's like, I could have that every day. I'll work my job and keep this place open if that's all I ever get. You know what I mean? Because that's what art is. They were happy, you know, and it's really powerful. And so this year we had, they called again and said, can we come again? And then we had multiple vans this time. And it was really wonderful because one of the people, we said, oh, that person was here early. And they said, yeah, they jumped back in the van for the second tour because they had to come back, you know, and we had the new sculpture here. So they were inside the sculpture, and it knocks me off my feet just to be able, for us to be able to do that is like everything. Sorry, big crybaby.
No, that's a really good reason to get choked up.
I just feel very fortunate that we get to do this.
Well, yeah, you're providing something that I'm sure the people that live there are so stoked that you and Glenn are doing.
Well, they're providing it for us too, you know. It's mutual. It has to be.
Symbiotic.
Yeah. You guys know, you work at an art center, you see the power of it, you know?
Absolutely. And we're, you know, I'm sure Kate agrees, but I won't put words in your mouth. You know, I feel very fortunate to be involved with a community-based operation, you know, because like we're talking about, it is a powerful and healing thing, being able, just the simple act of making.
Yep. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah, totally. I agree. I always say like my first favorite thing about working at the Hudgens is the people I work with, our team. And my second favorite thing is working somewhere where you really believe in the mission is great. It's just fabulous.
Have you been, Kate, to Art Basel down in Miami?
No, I really want to.
I know Ty and I were very fortunate that GSU kind of allowed us that opportunity, and Glenn went to that. And I think, you know, that's another side of the art world that people think exists. That's what they think the art world is it's, you know, $1 million artists and fancy stuff, and it's, you know, champagne in Miami, you know, and it's 99.9% of the art world is not that. And people feel they don't belong because of things like that. And, you know, art is for everybody. Everybody should feel welcome wherever art is. I am a huge believer in that. And being a gateway for people that don't know that they belong to it, that's the coolest thing ever. I mean, imagine your lives the first time you got turned on to the thing that drove your life. It's like, yeah, I mean, that's just rad. Just to be that catalyst is rad.
Yeah.
That's a really cool point, being a gateway instead of a gatekeeper. That's a cool thing for the arts.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, because I'm thinking about a few of our community and studio members that talk about, you know, they had full 40-year careers and before they discovered the Hudgens, and they'll say like, I wish I found this 30 years ago.
Right.
You know, so it's like that powerful of a thing.
I can see Glenn at home right now, and if he's watching, hi Glenn, he's probably laughing at me crying, but I'm sorry, I can't.
Well, he is watching, because he said a little bit ago, I just posted the 390-second daily photo a few minutes ago.
Yep.
And then also LaDonna, who's one of our longtime studio members, she says she definitely hopes they can visit on a field trip in the future. Your enthusiasm for our community is energetic and inspiring.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. I don't mean to keep talking, but we had our old spot, we had a big glass window, and we'd get there on Monday mornings often, and there'd be that side handprint right in the middle of the window. And Glenn is, like I said, so good about cleaning. He would be like, oh, why don't they just come when we're open? You know, like instead of like putting their hands up against our glass. So one day we get a phone call or an email, I can't remember, and this woman's like, hi, I don't know if you've seen, but there's handprints on your glass from me. I only pass through early on Sunday mornings from North Carolina to Florida when I go to visit my family, and you're never open. And we're like, well, then just tell us when you're coming, you know? And we've built this relationship with this friend of ours now over these years, where we open on Sunday mornings because that's when she can get here. We live 3 blocks away. Why would we not, like now we get Danish and coffee and we share art. Like, so when people are passing through, just let us know you're coming. We're always down to open up and share this stuff,
You hear that, LaDonna?
Donna, come. You guys are awesome. This has been fun. Thank you.
Oh no, we love to have you, and thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us.
Yeah, it's really fun talking to you.
Can you? I know you're in the process of catering up and coming visual artists, ceramic artists, and others. Can you talk to us about that plan a little bit and what you guys are doing there?
More in the residency ideas and stuff like that. Yeah. So one of the things, back to what we were just talking about, that gateway versus gatekeeper thing, is like when we got this space, there was it's an old house, like I said, with a very long corridor and 4 basically equal sized rooms off of that corridor. So there's 2 in the front and then 2 right after that go down the corridor. So there's 4 separate rooms. And Glenn and I were like trying, as soon as we saw it, we're like, oh, gallery, like experimental gallery, because the walls in here are a little like, uneven. So that's the space where somebody wants to go crazy, we let them go crazy. And then we've got the fireplace gallery that's like more fancy stuff. And then we've got a sales room. And then we're like, well, what do we do with this one? And we were like, artist in residence studio. And we were like, but it's in Tifton. How do we, entice somebody to come to Tifton? We can't afford to pay somebody and things like that. So we had to find ways to make it opportune, I don't want to say opportunistic for us, but an opportune way that they would feel they were getting something mutual from it, And our first artist in resident happened to be my very first student when I moved to Tifton, and I taught at ABAC, the student Shelby Evans. And you guys know when you walk in a room and somebody's like ready to learn and you make that eye contact and you're like, oh, cool, I've got that person now. Like, you haven't even really done anything yet, but they're on your side. And you're like, oh, okay, cool. Like, I got you, you got me, cool. And Shelby was that. And for that year I taught at ABAC, she was that go-to student and go-to artist. And she just made everything really easy. Stayed close with her. She actually became kind of like a family member when I moved to started teaching at Valdosta. And we said, hey, we're going to be doing this new space and we're going to do an artist in residency. And we were trying to figure it out. And she was just like, hi, can I do it? And it just didn't even dawn on us, because she was a journalism major. And we were like, well, that would be very narrow of us to say it had to be a potter or, And she's like, no, I really want to make visual arts based on my journalism. And we were like, oh. So there was no rules. The rule for her was, you have to be here 15 hours a week in exchange for when we were at work, and she kept the gallery open. And one of our crowning feelings about that is, after her year here, she applied to grad school at FSU and got a full ride to grad school, forget her MFA. So like something you didn't see and something that you didn't know could be possible has helped somebody else grow and become what they want to become. And so we've now had 2 other artists in residence since then. And one we just finished with is Sarah Moore. She was another student of mine. So that's what it's become. It's become kind of at this point, students that are local, but don't know what they're doing next, and want to continue to work. They get to apply and tell us what they would do at the time and the space. We are open to other people. It just hasn't happened yet. It's about 300 square feet, 400 square foot room. We take care of all your bills for being here as far as in the gallery, no electricity or anything like that you pay. We even help with materials when we can and stuff like that to get you started. And we give you exhibitions. We try to tie you in with curators and people to come, see your work. And then I told you I teach preparation, professional preparation at school. We try to tie that in too. So like, how do you hang a show? How do you engage with the community? How do you start a a mailing list? How do you make a postcard? All the things that go into being an artist, we try to do with them and teach them so that when they do go on, they have that kind of skill sets. Yeah.
That's fabulous.
It's been rad. It's been super fun. It's been challenging, no doubt, you know, because it's people that are starting and you're kind of, I'm not an old goat, but I mean, just like, you know, you got to try to find the thing that helps them grow. And teaching versus an artist in residency is very different. So how to marry those thinking has been at times challenging, but rewarding.
Yeah, I kind of feel like a broken record when I say this, but you know, it is such a valuable thing you're providing, like in particular the artist in residence program. So, you know, that gap between the end of school and whatever is such an important time to reassess what you're doing and maybe actually create again in a much different way than you did under the veil of academia.
Right.
And you're right, it is a different style of learning. Like you're learning, but you're learning in a completely new and almost unhinged way, not unhinged, but untethered way. Yeah. Because you know, something you have to I like unhinged too.
I make it very clear to them that I'm not going to give them critiques unless they ask, you know, because that's not what they're here for. They're not here to be judged. So unless they want feedback on their work, I try not to do it. You know, I mean, sometimes you can't help it yourself. You're like, oh, I'm really digging that, or well, what's going on there? But I try to keep that very minimal because I want them to feel that this is the time when that, you know, when we come out of school, and like we talk about this a lot in teaching, is like, you might get a little sick of critiques now. You know, like this week I've done 5-6 critiques with classes. You know, it's like, you're going to miss that. You are going to miss that opportunity to speak about your work. But there's a time between the missing it and it having it every day where you just want to make again and not have that constant judgment or thinking that you're being judged about your work. So residencies, post-backs, things like that are really great. In our area, there's not a lot of opportunity for that, so we're trying to provide that. Again, I just want to put it out there for anybody that's watching or sees this, like we have periods of time too where the space is open and we, you know, a month or something like that, and you contact us and say, hey, I'm a writer and I need a month to work on my book. We'd be open to something like that. Or a painter, a photographer. I'm going to be in the South area of Georgia and I need a studio for a month. And like, we've never been addressed that way, but we've never, you know, we've never said no to anything that makes sense, you know? Yeah. So you never know.
Man, you and Glenn, you guys are like the arts guardian angels.
Glenn's the good one. Let's just make that very clear. He's the good, like, he's the angel. I'm kind of just the person that does all the talking. He makes everything happen. I mean, he's the backbone of this business by far. I'm just the guy that they put on camera to talk about it.
I know you guys kind of rotate your shows, and right now you have up a photography show, and it's you can view it online.
You can view it online, actually. Thank you. Yeah, we just opened. It's this gentleman named Chris Cella is actually in Atlanta. He's a photographer and a documentary filmmaker, and grew up here in Tifton. And when I was visiting, saw the gallery, and we were like, "Oh, let's see your work." It always starts with that. Hey, what do you do? You know, we were blown away by his work, and he recently put up a show in the face of COVID-19. We couldn't have an opening, so we did a virtual opening, which is on plowgallery.com. All the work is there, and he's donating all his proceeds to a food bank here in the South Georgia area. And I'm horrible for not knowing the specific name of it. I apologize. I'll get it though. I'm sure Glenn actually is probably typing right now to share that. If he does, that would be great. But Chris, you know, we put up the show. We did some virtual openings with him on Instagram and on Facebook. And the work is from his travels the show is from Africa, Bolivia, India, Nepal, the US, I think that's everything. I think I got them all. But I brought 2 small examples because he has framed images and then he has unframed of many of the images, and you can determine which ones like you want to buy online if you wanted to, but I just brought some examples of the unframed ones to show. So here is him, one of his images from when he was traveling in Nepal and India. And they're just really strikingly beautiful, kind of National Geographic-esque. Actually, he has worked for them multiple times. So he's got the chops, and this is what we used as our image for the show.
Oh, lovely.
He's got a really incredible eye for color and placement, and just everything he does is. And if you get to hear him speak about his work on our page, the images he comes through in his images. He's very empathetic. He's very looking for those moments of people being honest and real, and they're beautiful photographs. We're very fortunate. And
Glenn says it's second harvest.
That's why we're a good team. Kate, you said before sometimes words don't work with you, right? You said something like words. I'm the same way. My students always sit there like finishing my sentences because words and I are just not friends.
Oh yeah, I'm like, someone figure out what I'm saying, decode it.
Yeah, Glenn is just the best. We're a good team together. Second harvest. See, I knew he'd know it.
What is your kind of general advice for somebody that's in the fine arts and they're thinking about graduate school or post-bac or residencies, or where they should take their careers? If you were to be asked.
Yeah, no, I like that question actually, because I think as teachers we deal with this often, but it's an awkward question for somebody. I don't think we always know the answer for others, but we did know it for ourselves. So I come from it that point of view. I didn't think I was ever going to go to grad school when I did undergraduate, and I spent a lot of time out in the world working weird, crazy jobs. I've worked in everything from fashion to teaching elementary school to working at the Apple store and a tattoo shop. And in that time, the thing that was the most constant was me making art. It never went away. And when that became obvious to me, because there was a time, there's times when you're like, oof, I need a break from making stuff. But it was never long, maybe a month, maybe 2 months at the most, but I was always sketching or writing. There came a point where, going back to that idea of discussion and needing feedback on my work, that grad school kind of got back into my head. Kathy King again and I were having a conversation one day, and she said, it's time. It had been 9 years since I had been in undergrad to that point in my life. And she said, well, maybe you should think about teaching. Maybe you should think about pursuing this to that level. It doesn't hurt. What do you got to lose? And I was like, yeah, I need the feedback. I need to work around people that are thinking about their work at the level that I was ready to at that point. And it really comes down, for me as an advisor, it has to be the thing is undeniable. Grad school to me is not something you put yourself into casually and think about casually because you're making a commitment to yourself and to your work and to the idea, but even to the school. And it's a relationship that I think a lot of people don't realize, that the school is benefiting from you as much as you're benefiting from the school. So finding the right programs, finding the right people, it's like speed dating when you're applying, in the sense like you're really asking a lot of questions to find the right things that are going to make this, I'm going to use your word, symbiotic relationship happen. And it's really important to know that you're ready before you start looking at grad schools. Mm-hmm. Post-bacs, residencies are really good ways to get ready for that discussion with yourself. If you're doing residencies and you're still continuing to grow and your work is growing and you're feeling good, but you're not maybe getting that highest level of kind of feedback or interaction with your colleagues or your fellow peers, then grad school might be that next step. Post-bac's another great one. There kind of comes these aha moments in your making that tell you that next step is that. sometimes it's not you thinking it, it is somebody coming up and saying, have you thought about this? Because I'm seeing it. And that aha moment can be really powerful as well. For me, I was at a place in my life where I was teaching elementary school and I didn't do well at it as far as the age group goes. I enjoyed sharing information. That's all I had to realize about myself. And I was also just ready to be challenged. And I had set very specific parameters for myself for where I would go to grad school. I wanted to be able to stay within an area of the country and be able to get back and forth to my life that I was going to be leaving to go to grad school. But then again, that changed drastically when I got to grad school. So life changes once you make that commitment, and you never know what's going to be on the other side of it. Because I don't think any three of us can sit here and say that we knew our life was going to be this. You know?
No.
The life in the arts is not determined by you necessarily. It's just not. I don't know if that was advice, but I just think being open and ready and having honest conversations with yourself and others is really powerful tool to make that decision.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
in that same vein, I was wondering what you thought of where, like, just, I guess, academia and maybe grad schools programs specifically, what do you think they could do? Where do you think they could improve to nurture professors and students?
Well, that's a really good question. And I'm going to be careful because I work in academia and I've had a lot of relationships with people in academia. And I think I'm very fortunate that I've worked with people that are passionate about teaching. The minute you are not passionate about teaching, and again, being self-aware enough and listening to your peers, it's time to get out of the way. Because you're holding up progress, not for just yourself, but for many others. So I think that though paychecks are lovely and security is lovely, it's selfish to stay somewhere that you shouldn't be. That's my first answer for all teaching at any level. Teaching is not something that you do selfishly. And the minute you start thinking about yourself first in a teaching situation, you're standing in the way of progress, I think, because you're looking at what matters to you and you are there to serve others. It is a job of service. And whatever level it's at, get out of the way and let somebody else do it that's ready and hungry and is going to feed that passion for others. I think that's the most important thing I can say about it. With that said, some of the most incredible things that I experienced in all my learning situations was not necessarily just the people in my direct view. And I'm going to speak about GSU, that one of the things I loved about being at GSU was that I don't know what it is like as far as structure goes now, but we were on the bottom floor and we had the whole building above us. And one of the first things I did when I got there was got on the elevator, went to the top floor and took the stairs down and walked through the entire building and saw who was there, what they were doing, shook hands, got to know people, because I realized really soon that education doesn't happen in the walls. It happens anywhere and everywhere that you're open to. And some of the best experiences and things that I had at grad school were with faculty from other departments that made me think and look at things totally differently than just the people that I was surrounding myself with because of my proximity. And I think Linda Arbuckle at the University of Florida taught me that before I ever went to grad school. I had applied to go to UF and didn't get in multiple times. And I remember her sitting down with me and saying, "You're thinking education happens in one place. And you have to realize that you know me enough to send me an email or call me. That's education too." And that really opened my eyes that education happens with anybody. It's that village idea. But really being open to the people around you and seeing what they can add to it. Building walls creates terrible detriments to your growth. And being able to recognize that knocking those down and letting anybody in and listening doesn't hurt. And you can grow tremendously from multiple inlets of that. So whatever grad school, residencies, post-bac, whatever it is, community centers, little galleries, just saying yes and getting it in you in some way is super important.
Both pieces of your advice are really good, but not just for people in the arts. I mean, your point about if you are not happy in the position you're in, leave, not just for yourself, but for the person who really wants to be there and other people could be benefiting from. I think it's great advice.
I was teaching elementary school, and I had gone to Penland School of Craft as just to study for a couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. This is a true story. I left. I taught at a year-round school in my Fort Lauderdale area, Miami area. I left the day to go to Penland after the day I got all my certifications finally. I had been teaching was a second career, so I had been going through certifications I didn't go to school for. I got my certification. The next day I left for Penland for 2 weeks. Got back and resigned. Because I had gone to Penland for the first time and saw the power of community, and that this was the thing that I really needed to be doing. And I was going to school every day like, oh, for the love of goodness, please let me just get through this day. And not going, hee, this is great. It started that way, but soon after, about 3-4 years in, and I started seeing the challenges of teaching 800 kids a week art on a cart. I'm not built for that. I wasn't of service to the children. It's not their fault. It's not their fault they're kids and they want to learn. It's me. So get out of the way. And that's exactly what I decided to do. I'm sorry to all the children that were in that school at that time if I ever did anything.
They're all engineers now, you monster.
They are. When you think that they're all like having families now, that it was that long ago, you're like, I'm old.
No, I think that's really important advice, and it's something that I think we all think about from time to time when you will run into that person sometime in your academic journey. It's like, why are you still here? And it's like, people, they're colleagues of yours that you went to school with, and you know that they're out there grinding, looking, and they're doing all the things that they're supposed to do. They're in the residencies, they're in these big shows, but they're still, which it's not a bad job, but they're bagging groceries or doing everything else just to make ends meet so they can still do that thing that they're passionate about. Whereas they would be better served sharing that passion, sharing that enthusiasm, sharing that creative thinking with up and coming thinkers.
Absolutely. I cannot agree more. And I hope, I think about it. I hope that if I ever get to that point, I'm not recognizing it, that my peers and my friends and my things would say, dude, you're done. You know what I mean? And I hope I'm able to hear it, because it's really important. If you trust somebody enough that says that to you, listen, I don't know. I feel very fortunate that I have people in my life that I trust on that level, and I know they'll call me out.
Yeah, I guess it's one of those things that's definitely easier said than done. So one could always, if I was in that position, I would, like you, I would hope that I would be like receptive to that information. Somebody saying like, hey man, you gotta let it go. You ain't doing so hot.
Change it up.
Yeah.
Do something different. Like you can still stay there, but maybe it's time to think that like, you're just not being as effective as you used to be. And why is that? We all need to get a kick in the tuchus once in a while to grow and but be open to it. Are you being attacked, Ty?
I have a Zoom animal.
Zoom animal. Where's yours, Kate?
How'd that get in your house, Ty?
I don't know. I called it. Go up there.
She's right here. She's right. Don't look at my groceries in the back.
Gross.
You guys are awesome. Oh man.
Zoom cat.
Do you have pets or studio cat or anything?
We have a 115-pound bulldog that stays at home. His name is Gus. I think Ty met him a few times when he was a pup. He used to come to the studio when he was a puppy.
115 pounds, my goodness.
He is a bus. He is just, the other day Glenn took a picture. I got a new license plate and Gus was on the couch and he just laid it on him. And it's like, yes, he actually is big enough that he deserves his own like license plate now.
Gus the Bus.
He's the best though. He's the best dog. Sweetest thing on 4 legs.
Well, I think we'll wrap it up at the Zoom, animals. It's about, Mark, thank you again so much for taking this time out of your very busy schedule and
awesome.
Sharing your information with us, and then also more importantly providing the things that you do to future, like I said, thinkers of the world, animals trying to eat my cord, and an outlet for creative people.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys giving me the time to talk about it, and anytime you guys want to come down, let us know.
Oh,
we're looking forward to it.
When we're allowed, I guess I should say. Thank you guys. I really appreciated this.
Thanks, Mark.
Bye, Facebook.
Bye, Facebook.